I'm absolutely a fan of a tool called WP Grid Builder, or people also refer to it as Grid Builder WP. I think both are correct. It's basically a grid builder or post builder, or I think there's a more official term like query loop builder, or as they say, query layout and filter for WordPress here. It's a phenomenal tool. I'm using it on my homepage in order to filter all of my content, including my courses, my tutorials, where people can sort and find the content that I've made. I'm using it on my blog page instead of a WordPress like official or default customizer layout. So I use it to help people look through my tutorials. And I'm also using it on silo pages to build these different queried loops or post lists for various different topics. It's just a phenomenal tool. And at first it can be a little confusing on how to use it. But hopefully after this tutorial, you're going to see how I've been able to streamline the process of using it for my own website. And I hope that you'll see why I'm a big fan. On the website, you can check out the different demos. They have them for e-commerce portfolio. So for example, the e-commerce demo creates what looks like a WooCommerce or just really slick looking experience for e-commerce. It basically is all of what you're seeing here. There's also like a portfolio if you wanted to do like images or things like that. And then there's a map demo, which I think is phenomenal, like super slick. But what I'm going to focus on is mostly, well, entirely just the blog demo. I'm going to show you how I've used it on my own website. And if you're interested in learning more about these other features, you can check out the link in the description to go check out WP Grid Builder. Now, inside of WP Grid Builder here, you can see that there's different add-ons. It works with things like Bricks, Beaver Builder. I mean, you can see all these in here. Lots of different page builders like Elementor, Oxygen. There's the map facet for the map one. There's LearnDash. It works with a lot of things with default integrations. It works perfectly with the block editor, which is what I'm going to show today. And it works with a lot of other things that don't even have specific add-ons. It can query a lot of different things. So if you're using one of these tools, you'll find those under the add-on section right here in the dashboard. Okay, let's talk about the different components of Grid Builder. So we basically have the grid, which are these tiles here that I've created for my own layout. Then you have what are called facets. Facets are the little extras, things like tag filters, a search field, the ability to choose categories, the ability to hit the reset button to reset the post list, all of those different things, and many others, including pagination, and the list goes on and on. All of those are called facets. Then we have the cards. The cards are the specific designs that comprise the different things that are being queried in a grid. So if we go into the back end of WP Grid Builder, you can see in the top right, we have grids, cards, facets, and styles are just like it sounds. You can apply like, I want my buttons to be blue. I want the border radius to be XYZ. They're not really a component. They're just a way to customize some of the different parts of Grid Builder. I find a really great place to get started with Grid Builder is to browse their demos. If you browse their demos, they have all sorts of demos that you can import. There isn't much labeling here or knowing what they are. They've kind of labeled them by these gemstones here, but I recommend you just import all of them, which is what I've done. And if we go to cards, you'll see that they've imported a lot of them here, and I have all of them on my site. I find that these are a really good place to get started, and once you find one that you like, you can duplicate it and customize it to your liking. For example, agate here looks like this overlay with a gradient on top of it. Amber, I really like amber. I think it's clean, it's modern looking. There's, I don't know how to say this one, beryl. Don't like that one as much, but you get the idea. You can go through these until you find one that you like and then customize it. For example, I made one called Simple Blog Post, which is what I use on my own website here under tutorials. View my tutorials. It's just a simple image with a rounded border and a title. Really, really simple and clean. So that's where I want to get started first is going through the cards, and I'm going to use mine as an example. At first glance, this looks super, super confusing, but it doesn't have to be. It's much easier in general to understand if you have a basic knowledge or a working knowledge of the WordPress block editor because it uses a very similar setup. So for example, in the upper left, we can open up our list view and we can see that we have the card, which represents all of the card. Within our card, we have our media, which is the image section. We have under media, different components, right? We have the thumbnail, which is the actual image. And then on top of our thumbnail or nested inside of it, we have our content. And there's three sections, the content top, middle, and bottom. Now, this might not be true for every design, but this is true for my design, or at least the design that I copied, renamed, and tweaked to my liking. After the media, we have the content section here. The content section is comprised of the body and the footer. Basically, two sections, just like there's three sections inside of the content for the media. As you can see, I haven't done much. I literally have my media with its thumbnail, and then I just have the post title inside of the body section. Everything else is left empty. So if we want to edit one of the sections, we're just going to select the section we want to edit. So for example, if I want to edit the thumbnail, I'll select the thumbnail, and then on the right-hand side, you have 3 sections. Card is going to represent the entirety of the card. These are the macro settings for the card. Block are going to be the settings specific to the individual blocks inside of our card. And then CSS is custom CSS, which we're not going to really go into. If we look under the main card settings here in the top right, which represent the settings for the entirety of the card, as I mentioned, you can see that we have different options. We have masonry, we have metro, we have alignment left or right. If I click right alignment, you can see that I'm aligning my different components left and right versus the alignment going up and down, the vertical versus the horizontal. That's how you would achieve one of those blog layouts where the posts look like the image is on the left or the right and the text is on the side. I tend to prefer a card that looks more like this, so we'll keep our alignment vertical. And then for our blocks, these are the blocks I discussed a second ago. You have the card header, which I've turned off, and instead I'm starting right with my card media, which you can see I can toggle on and off, and then the same for the body and the footer. For the thumbnail, I can put in an overlay, which is a color overlay on top, which I don't use. And if you turn on auto height, that's going to basically adjust the height of all of your images to kind of make them all the same. I would say if you're having a problem where you've uploaded a bunch of different images as featured images and there are a bunch of different sizes, you may want to try auto height to avoid some issues with the layout. On my website, I upload all of my featured images at the exact same resolution, so I don't really have a problem, so I leave mine off. Now let's go into the block settings where we're going to spend the rest of our time here inside of our card. I'm going to go ahead and select the thumbnail as an example here. And inside of my block settings, I have the default settings for the block, such as the interaction. I'm saying on click, do nothing. And well, why? And that's because on my card, if I select the card on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, you can see I'm just telling the entirety of the card. If someone clicks anywhere on it, I'm going to redirect to the single page, which is basically the post or the term or whatever it is that you're showing inside of your grid. So if this were my tutorial grid, if they click anywhere on the card, it'll take them to the related tutorial. Now let's go ahead and reselect our thumbnail here, and we can go over to the right-hand side under Styles. That's our second tab, one to the right of our settings. Here's where you're probably going to be overwhelmed again, at least I was when I got started. There are so many different options, but you don't need to tackle all of them. That's why I recommend finding a card demo that you like and then tweaking it, because let's say that you imported my design here, and you're saying, well, I don't want the corners to be rounded. So what you would do is you'd go to Borders, drop that down, and you'll see that I've applied an 8-pixel radius to the corners of all of my cards. Or you may say, you know what, 8's not enough. On my website, I use 12. So you just adjust it there. If you wanted an outline on all of your thumbnails, you would drop down the outline and apply one. Only be worried about the different style settings that you need to or want to change. Don't be overwhelmed by all the different options. And remember, you don't need to make these changes on every one of these sections. For example, I made my border change under the thumbnail, but not under the media. So my rounded corner didn't apply to everything under the media section, just to the thumbnail itself. I could have done it to the card though. Let's say, for example, I wanted my card to have a completely rounded look. At the bottom here, you can see that this white section that represents the footer or the bottom of my card, this is not rounded. It's kind of hard to see on the video. But if I select my card and I go to Borders, I could apply an 8-pixel border to the entirety of my card, and that would make the borders rounded on the entirety of the card. But I honestly prefer to do that at an individual level on these individual blocks. I find it's easier for me to just grasp that, oh, I've made the thumbnail rounded, I've made the footer section rounded, or the content section, things like that. Now you can set animations, that's the third tab. You can set animations that will fire off when a card is revealed. So for example, let's go ahead and come back here to my tutorials. I'll give this a refresh. You can see how they just kind of like pop in as I scroll down. Those are different animations that I can set up here under the animation section. Now these can be transitions or true animations. You can see on my card itself, I don't have any, but under my thumbnail, I have an ease out, and under my content, or where was it? One of these sections, I have the media and the content. I've added in different easing, and that's what achieved that little phase in effect. But you can play around with these and find the one that you like the most. Now there are more components or blocks that we can add into our card design. For example, let's say I wanted to add the category. of the blog post directly above the title. I would go into my block inserter here, clicking that little plus, and I'd scroll down until I find post. And I'm going to look for post terms. Here it is here. I'll go ahead and drag that in, and you can see a blue line appears, and I'll let go. Now I'm still on my transition tab, so I'm going to go ahead and come over to the settings tab on my block settings so that I can choose what's going to appear here for these terms. I just want these to be tags, so I don't want it to be any taxonomy. If I click on this drop down under taxonomies, you're going to see all the different taxonomies on my website that WP Grid Builder is finding. I'll just find the tags option, I'll select that, and then I'll decide which tags I want to include or exclude if I want to, but if I don't really care about which ones, I'll just leave the include terms and exclude terms blank. I can also choose what happens when somebody clicks on one of those terms. Do I want it to redirect to the particular archive? For example, if I had a tag called WP Grid Builder and somebody clicked on it, where would I want it to go? I could tell it to redirect to the term, the single page for the term, and this would open up an archive page on my website that would show all of the posts related to WP Grid Builder. I'm not going to do any redirects on this, so I'll just leave that blank. Now I can go to the Styles tab and I can change how these individual terms are displaying. For example, under colors, I can choose to add a background color, and I can make the background of all of them a solid color, and I can change the text to display as white so that it's more visible. Then I could go to spacing because they're kind of tight in there. I can go to spacing and I say, I want the padding on each of these to be 2 pixels, and that gives it a little more space to breathe. I might even say 5 pixels. And then I'll go to borders and I'll say, you know what, I want these to be perfectly round, or I want them to just have a 12 pixel border or something like that. It depends on what you want it to be. And that's going to help give you this more rounded or slightly rounded effect. So I may choose to go to spacing and I may choose to increase, that was way too much there, but I may choose to increase this to something like 8 pixels. Or if you want to click this little link button, I can unlink this and say, I want the top and bottom to be 3. So I'll change the top and the bottom to 3. And I'll change the right to, I don't know, maybe 8 looks good to me. So I'll leave that alone, and then I'll return to my borders and I'll decide maybe 3 pixels or 5 pixels. Gives me that more like rounded rectangular look. And that's how I would add the different terms as little indicators on my blog posts. I'll let you go ahead and play around with any of the additional features that you want here that you can add into your grids. You can add all sorts of different things, from usernames to comment counts, post statuses, anything you want can be added in here. You can even include the excerpt or the post content itself. And you can also go in and adjust how this looks on tablet and mobile, but for the most part, if you're building a grid that looks like this is going to be how it looks on all of the devices. All right, so once you have a card designed exactly how you like it, now it's time to go onto the grids themselves. So let's go ahead and go into one of my grids that I created called blog. And let's walk through the different settings here and the ones that you need to think about if you just want to create some simple layouts like I have. So let's take a look at my grid here on my tutorial page, which is the same thing as the blog post list or the main blog page on a website. I've simply created a page and I've used WP Grid Builder. And then on the back end of WordPress under settings reading, I've told it to have no specific blog page. And I've just linked to this page as my blog page. So my grid has 9 items showing 3 by 3, and I'm only showing posts that are in my tutorials or my comparison categories. So let's go into our grid and let's first take a look at this first page called the query. This is what we are looking for or querying inside of our posts. So our content is going to stay as posts, and under per page, I've put 9. That's pretty simple, right? I've chosen the order to be descending, meaning the newest ones go first. For the posts, which is a WordPress term, pages are posts, posts are posts, post types are posts. But for the post types, I've just chosen posts. Those are just what you find under the default WordPress post section. I'm only showing published by any author. I've not chosen to specifically include or exclude any posts, but I am going to open up the advanced settings and I'm going to set specific taxonomies, meaning I only want to show specific categories inside of my grid. So in this particular example, I said I only want to show the posts that are in the tutorial or comparison categories. So I'm going to include tutorial, and all I did was go in here and search for tutorial, and I said include. And I did the same thing as an or condition because I wanted to show all tutorials or all comparisons. And that's where it gets a little confusing because when we speak, we'll say, I want to show tutorials, and comparisons. But when we create a grid, it has to be an or. Otherwise, what it's going to do is it's going to say only show the posts that are in tutorial and comparison. And that's not what we want. We want to have it be show all of these or all of these. And that's all I've set under query. Now for layout, this can look really confusing at first, especially if you've imported a grid or you just are using the defaults and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many numbers, it doesn't make any sense to me. It's not too bad. So for my behavior, I've chosen equal height columns, which works perfectly fine because if you look at my example here, it's just going to keep them all equal height. It's going to keep it as a grid. And then under sizing, this is the confusing part. You're like, oh my gosh, 3 columns, whatever. Just think of this as how you want your layout to look. By default, number 1, I want it to be 3 columns. See here, 3 columns, 1, 2, 3. And the 9999 pixels just means on the most widest monitor TV possible, I just want it to show 3 columns. I don't want it to grow beyond that. And I want the spacing between each of these grid items to be 28 pixels. So that's what's here on the first line. And then the next option is, well, if it's not going to be 3 columns and my monitor shrinks, if it shrinks down to 1200 pixels, I want it to be 2 columns. And an easy way to see that would be to inspect your page, like in Chrome, for example, and go to your little device, I don't know what they call this, the toggle device toolbar. And up at the top here, we can change this to responsive, and we can change this to say 1200. And then of course I'll go like this. It's kind of hard to see. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit here. Go to 100%. Oh, that's gonna tweak it, right? But let's go ahead and change this to 1200. And hopefully you can see that once I hit 1200, it drops down to just 2 columns. A little hard to see, but it's at 2 columns now. The -1 just means it's going to inherit what was previously set for the spacing. And you can see that under the tooltip here. Set it to -1 to inherit the previous spacing value. So all I'm doing is saying at 1200 pixels, which is a more narrow monitor, maybe an older, smaller laptop or a small monitor screen, I want it to be 2 columns. And column number 3 is really achieving a similar effect. It's also just saying go to 2 columns. I probably don't even need this one right here, but I've chosen that if the screen shrinks below 768 pixels, or if it reaches 768 pixels, I want it to just be 1 column. This would be more for like mobile devices. So you're able to set different sizes that your grid will adapt to or be forced to adapt to in order to show exactly how you want it to. Now under advanced settings, this is our advanced layout editor for our builder. Now, if you're using the block editor in WordPress, you really don't need to worry about this. We can customize this fully inside the block editor. However, I want to show you that in mine, if I close out of this thing again, in mine, I do have pagination down at the bottom, and this is built into my grid. I could have just put this in the block editor. It did not need to be in my grid. However, I've been using WP Grid Builder for a couple of years now, at least, back when I was still using another page builder that did not have an integration with WP Grid Builder. So I had to use the shortcode. I had to drop a shortcode onto the page, and it was much harder to get the pagination to look like I wanted it to be and to place it exactly where I want. So I chose that below my grid, I wanted to add in my blog pagination facet. That's those little extras I talked about. So I'll show you in a second how to create facets. But for example, blog pagination, I chose to appear left aligned. If I open this up here, I chose to left align my blog pagination with a 1 EM margin above it, which is how I get this look. Totally optional for, I would say, all but this exact grid. I don't even open up the advanced settings here. I don't even use this builder. So if I take a look at my home page, this grid right here was built entirely without the builder. It was just built in the block editor. So it's up to you if you want to play with this builder. I chose not to. All right, let's go on to the last section, and that is the facets section, these little extras. And I'm going to walk you through how to create a few of them. It's super easy. Let's go ahead and create a new one, and I'll walk you through it. Let's say that we wanted to create, let's find an option here. Let's say we wanted to create this little section here on the left that I say browse by tool. This is a list of the tags that my tutorials are sorted into. So let's go ahead and create that. So what type of facet do we want to create? Well, we can choose between filter, load, sort, reset, and apply. I'm going to filter by tag, so I'm going to leave that as filter. Now the type, I can create a checkbox, a radio, a dropdown, a button, you name it, right? There's tons of different options here. So what do these look like? Well, they look like buttons, and that's right, they are buttons. So I'll choose buttons, and now I need to filter my data source. So what type of content am I going to filter? I'm going to filter my posts, which are the posts on my post grid. And what am I going to filter by? Well, for me, I wanted to filter by tags. So I'll remove categories and I'll just type in tag. There we go. Taxonomies, tags. Now I can show advanced settings here, but I really don't need to. I don't want to exclude any of my tags. I don't want to only include certain ones. I don't really use child tags. So I'll just say tags and I won't set any advanced settings. Now for order number, I am choosing to order by the choice count, meaning how many posts have that tag, but you can set different options here. You can manually set them however you want. You can go under advanced and you can, to your heart's content, do a lot more customization than you need to, but I don't bother with any of that. For my particular design, which is right here, I actually turned off almost all of these. I went ahead and turned off everything because I didn't want to show empty ones. I didn't want to show how many are in each tag. I would put a little number next to it. It's not bad, but I chose not to. I didn't want to show children tags. I only wanted people to be able to make multiple selections. And if you come back here, let's say I wanted to see everything that was in Thrive Apprentice and SureCart. There you go. They could select multiple different tags and it would filter and keep filtering until it found all of my content that had the Thrive Apprentice and SureCart tag. So that's how you would achieve that multiple select feature. Now under conditions, we can add a condition and say we'll hide this facet or only show this facet if a certain condition is met. So you can say, I want to reveal the facet when, and then you can walk through this process of setting up the ands or the ors. I could say I only want to show it when the user's login status is logged in. Right, so you can make some really fancy facets that only appear when the user's logged in. And that's kind of cool because you could have like a special hidden section of content in your same grid that only appears to logged in users. You might have a use case for that, and that's how you'd set that up under conditions. But I don't need any of that for my basic grid builder, so I'm going to turn that off. Advanced has some other stuff. You could set the slug if you want to. You don't really need to. And that's it for facets. So like I said, there's a lot of different kind of facets. There's search buttons, drop downs, there's reset buttons. If you wanted to, for example, do load content pagination. So load content, that's where you'd find your paginations. Your pagination could simply be like mine is, which is like numbers, or you could do like a load more posts or just keep scrolling and loading more. However you want to do it, that's how you would set that under behavior. You could create a reset button. There's very few options for that. It's literally reset. You can click an apply filters button if you wanted to, and the list just keeps going on. There are so many different types of filters that you can add. All right, so how do we add our grid to our page? Well, you can get the shortcode. Once you've built your facet, you can come in and click this little shortcode option. You can do that for your facets. You can do that for your grids. So you can copy all the different shortcodes for each individual one. I could come into my blog, I could copy the shortcode, and I could drop that anywhere. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. If you're using a page builder, you'll go into your page builder and you'll probably follow a similar process to what I'm doing, but I'm just using the WordPress block editor. So I'll come into my block editor and I'll open up my list view, and you can see down here I have a container, and within that container I have two containers. The left container is housing my facets and the right container is housing my grid. I'm using Spectra, by the way, so we use containers. Easy way to organize the structure of the page. So the grid here on the right, all I did was add the grid block, which is found under, if I search for WP Grid Builder, you can see that I have grids and facets. Pretty cool. And I would just drop those in wherever I want them to go. And once you drop them in, it just asks you to select what it is you dropped in. So for me, if I select my grid here, on the right-hand side, it says select a grid. All I would do is type in blog, because that's what I called my grid. For my different facets, for example, my reset button, I'm selecting a facet. I'm selecting the reset button I made, and I'm telling it to apply to my blog grid. And that's what's really cool. You can have multiple grids on a page and tell different facets to function with different grids. And I'm telling this one to function with my blog grid. Same thing with my tutorials box. Now you'll see that I have just added text here, search tutorials. That's just a heading block in the block editor. The actual search bar itself is the facet. So my search bar is my search facet that I've literally just called search, and it's applying to my blog grid. Same thing with my narrow by tool. It's my select tool, which is what I've called my facet, which is what we just looked at building a second ago, and it's applying to the same one. So like I said in the beginning, I'm a real fan of this plugin. I think there's so much potential for customization, for creating different grids that are queried and different facets that filter your content. Just the mere fact that I can put this on my homepage where people can search and find my sales pages for my courses. They can browse my tutorials. I can create grids that really make the experience of interacting with my website much more engaging, filterable, and customizable. And this is done in a very polished way using WP Grid Builder. If you have additional questions about WP Grid Builder, feel free to leave them down below or check out my WP Grid Builder playlist where you'll find plenty more tutorials on this tool.